and just checking that they have got all of the things that they need in order to be able to access the remote learning that their school will be providing. And if they haven't, then actually contacting the school to have that conversation. So I know schools are mobilising a huge amount of resources at the moment to ensure that children have got laptops, that they have got Wi-Fi access. The companies are offering data uplifts. So there's always something that we can do, but it's just making sure that there's no excuses, that actually the schools are sending out lots of work, and just to make sure it's as easy as possible to stick to that routine, to have all of the things to hand that they need, and then also stopping children. So some children will always try and do too much and will do everything and all of the extension activities. And it is very difficult to try and plan a set amount of remote work, because when you're in the classroom and when you can see children working, you know how quickly the class is working through, you know who you need to support, you know who you need to give some extension work to. We haven't always got that ability, certainly not with recorded lessons, but not even with live lessons. They just don't allow for that interaction. And some children might be racing through the work and maybe not grasping everything that teachers have asked, and others will be doing too much. So it's been that usual interested person who is their spokesperson. How are things going, and where can you step in to help and support, and making sure that you're speaking to the school to get as many resources and as much information as possible.
Great. And Alicia, from your perspective, would you add anything else to that?
Yeah, from my perspective, I mean, I sympathise enormously with parents. I mean, over the years, parents, as we know, have had to carry out many roles, not only the cooking of the meals and the laundry, we've become the taxi drivers, and now all of a sudden we've become the home tutors, and we've also got to become a family psychologist, because so many children nowadays are struggling with feelings of stress and anxiety, and parents are almost sort of on a very steep learning curve. Well, how do I cope with all of this? I think, we are in an extremely unusual situation, and of prime importance. I think parents really should just focus on the kind of relationship that you would like to come out of this with your child. Nothing is worth ruining your relationship for. So it's time to be a bit more relaxed, and there will be messy bedrooms, and the house will not look anywhere near as clean and tidy and organized as you would like it. But front and center has to be, okay, I'm trying to offer a supportive environment, and at the end of this, think about what kind of relationship do I want to have with my child when we come out of lockdown and things go back to normal. Children do love having timetables. Even teenagers who think they like to be adventurous and they like new experiences are so used to having their lives timetabled that actually without a timetable, they do start to flounder and feel a bit lost. They are creatures of habit. It's hard for parents also, when I'm thinking sort of about you don't really want your relationship to disintegrate into nagging. Have you done your homework? Isn't it about time you got onto Zoom or Google Classrooms? And what are you doing? And bedrooms are a mess. And what time are you going to bed? And what time are you waking up? I like the idea of holding a weekly family review meeting. Now, where kids nowadays are used to posting reviews, we all write reviews of our holidays, reviews on Amazon. Getting together once a week to have a family meeting just to discuss how things are going is going to mean that you can limit all the nagging and moaning that goes on throughout the week. And also you can stop your children from doing it, because each time there's any argument over, who's got the laptop, who's hogging the remote control, you could just sort of say, okay, fine, let's park it and discuss it at the family meeting. And it also encourages your child then to be able to control their emotions for a little bit longer, because they're not, releasing all of their dissatisfaction immediately. We can park it, wait for the weekly meeting. And then when you're discussing all of those kinds of problems as a family, it also encourages your teenager to come up with solutions, because probably what was bothering them on a Tuesday won't be bothering them by the weekend. I think also just tapping into this whole business of mental health issues and anxiety, I think it's it's good to encourage teenagers to be able to describe their emotions. You know, when we think of small children who are not really used to describing how they're feeling, that's where we see sort of toddler tantrums. And, you know, you'll have a child that one morning wants to have cornflakes in the bowl first and then the milk second, and then the next day they'll be in floods of tears because we've done it all wrong and it was supposed to be the milk first and cornflakes next. Obviously that is not the real cause of their distress, but they don't quite know how to explain what it is that they're feeling. So I think to encourage our teenagers to be able to describe their feelings, but rather than describing them using words such as, you know, I'm really suffering with my mental health at the moment. I mean, they're very, very strong words, and it's possible to talk yourself into a problem rather than talking yourself out of it. You know, it's a case of sort of describing ourselves as being out of sorts or frazzled. I made a list of sort of words that we could use. You know, I'm feeling a bit restless today, or I'm having a wobbly moment, or I'm feeling a bit jumpy. Those kind of words suggest that the feeling is temporary. Whereas when we start talking about I'm suffering from anxiety, this sort of sounds as if it's something we're going to have to cope with for the rest of our lives. And this is actually just not true. And then when parents, you know, if your child does have a meltdown and you're wondering, well, what answer can I give them? And there's so much uncertainty. So much is unknown. Will I be taking exams? Will I go to university? We have absolutely no idea. Parents can't come up with the right answer. There is no right answer at the moment. So actually being honest and saying, look, we don't have all the answers right now, but I can see that we're going to be able to have a think about it. We're going to have to think about our possible options. So we're not saying, I don't know, and leaving it, or asking a child to sort of stop moaning and stop bleating on about it and wait and see, but just be honest and say, I don't have that answer right now, but I do know that there are several people that we can get advice from, and we will find a solution. It's about reassuring them that it is okay to feel worried, uncertain. We're in the middle of a pandemic. It's unknown. It would be odd if we didn't feel worried and fearful right now. Mm-hmm. That would not be normal.
And, what would you say in this sort of, because I can imagine that sometimes trying to help keep your child keep their education on track and trying to keep a good relationship with them can be two concepts in conflict with one another. How can you approach that sort of conflict that moment of nagging where you feel if they're demotivated and you want to have them help them work, but you also want to be their friend?
From my perspective, Kathryn might say something different. I think it's more important to ensure that your child doesn't forget how to learn. So it's about being able to have the routines, you know, the actual knowledge and information and the facts and the skills they can acquire later, provided that they're still ready to learn and they haven't lost their learning skills. And that does mean, you know, getting up early in the morning, being out for your pajamas, having your breakfast. If possible, you know, if your child is tired and can't sit down in front of a screen for whatever reason, I would see if you can get up even earlier, go out, have a walk before, because ordinarily they would be walking to school or traveling to school. And we're missing out that, you know, to fall out of bed and rush downstairs to join an online class is really quite difficult. So it's about ensuring that you are still in a work mode.
Mm-hmm. And Kathryn, what would you say to that?
No, I would absolutely agree to that, and I would say that if there is a piece of work that's really difficult or they're finding it really hard, it's just having those conversations about what the alternative is at that moment in time. There is no point in sitting there getting really frustrated, really upset about some work, but what's the solution? What would you do if you were at school? You'd ask your teacher, you'd maybe go and speak to your form tutor, you'd ask your friends. So in which case there's no harm whatsoever in setting up those WhatsApp groups or however they're doing it, so they're staying in touch with their peers and trying to keep things as normal as possible, and absolutely having those breaks between lessons. So Alicia is absolutely right. In school, they walk to school, there'd be that time in the morning when they could meet with their friends before school and have a chat. We do morning registration where we can just settle everybody in. They're moving between lessons. They've got break times, lunch times. All of those routines have gone. So the more they can be kept in place and the more children are encouraged to get up from their chairs and their laptops, we're finding it hard to work from home as adults. So for teenagers to be asked to do that, it's a big ask. And we've spent lots of years asking children not to spend too much time on screens, and we've effectively moved their whole lives onto screens. So I think it's trying to find, if there's a particular problem, stop. It's not worth having that meltdown over that piece of work at that moment in time. There's always something else. But I would absolutely encourage that continuing to learn. So finding reading books that children are interested in, and certainly there's lots of free resources being put online at the moment. Finding that activity that you can do around the house or in the garden, or working with older siblings or younger siblings, anything that just means that you're still in that work mode, but actually it's not feeling like something that's overwhelming at that moment in time. But those habits are really, really important.
Yeah, so not being too hard on yourself or your kids.
Absolutely.
I would just add to everyone, I forgot to say at the beginning, there are some questions coming through, which in the chat, which we'll try to answer at the end, but it's even more organised if you click on the Q&A button, which is at the bottom of your Zoom, and add a question in there. And then in the last 20 minutes, Nicola, who's our CMO, which is Chief Marketing Officer, whenever I mention Nicola, to my friends, which I do all the time, people go, why do we have a chief medical officer at MyTutor? Which we don't. So she's not Chris Whitting, she's Nicola. So if you add in your questions there to the Q&A, we'll do our best to get through them all in the last 20 minutes. So just moving on from that, I've got quite a practical question for Kathryn. So now that most exams, I believe, last time I checked, have been cancelled, and at least we know they have in Wales and Scotland, what should kids in their GCSE or A-level year to get good grades still?
Absolutely, the first thing to do is to keep going. These courses are not finished, and absolutely keep working with your school and with your teachers. And we've reached out to our year 11 and year 13 students. Immediately we were told of the exams not running in the same format, just to say that actually this is a very, very different situation to last year. So when the schools closed down in March last year, the children at that point were effectively told there was nothing more that they could do. All of their work would be taken into account up until that point, but nothing could be added to it in order to be fair to everybody. And what that actually meant is that for those students in year 11 and year 13, their course is finished in March, and there was nothing more they could do. It's completely the opposite situation now. We've still potentially got 5-6 months of these courses left. It is really important to keep going. There may well in England be these possible class-based assessments. We're still waiting for guidance on what that's going to look like. Teachers are still finishing teaching the courses, and they're still amassing evidence. So it is really important that they finish the course for their own self-worth and self-esteem. You've started these courses, you've already invested 1.5 years of your life in these courses. You want to know that you've got to the end. So work with the schools and finish those courses off. But equally, everything is now in your power. If your grades have been going well, and if you're comfortable, and if your mock exams have been good up until now, fantastic, keep going, because the teachers have all of that evidence and they can obviously add to it. If you're sitting there now thinking, well, actually, things haven't gone well, my mock exams weren't fantastic, I was really struggling, I haven't been able to show what I was capable of, actually now you've got the chance. You've still got time to do that. But the teachers do need evidence, and if you don't provide some of the ongoing assessment, if you don't focus on those mock exams or those class-based assessments that are going to come up, the teachers just won't have the evidence to be able to say you would have been this grade or you are this grade. So absolutely, this is not a time to think everything's over and there's nothing more I can do. This is absolutely the time to think, actually, it's all back in my hands. And particularly for those students who've often struggled with exams or might find that's a really pressurized situation where they come out and think that's just so unfair, I knew so much and I just didn't answer the right question, or I got my timings wrong. Actually, that pressure has gone now. And even if we do have these class-based assessments, which is looking very likely, actually that's not going to be the deciding factor. No one thing now is going to be your grade. Actually, what's going to be your grade is that cumulative evidence that the teachers have. And I'll say it again, the control now is back in students' hands, but you really do need to work alongside your teachers and give them every bit of evidence. If you know you missed some work from before the summer even, and you've got a little bit of time to go back and review that, then do it. What teacher's not going to be delighted if you send some extra work in? But equally, pace yourself. This is not send everything you possibly can. Talk to your teacher and find out if there are gaps and where you can fill those in. And if you work alongside your teachers and your school, they want the very best for you. But they need you working with them.
Yeah, so the key there is that it's so, even though it's only a couple of months earlier, it's so different this time compared to the last one.
It's completely different. So if you saw that, you will have seen the students in year 11 and 13 last year, you may have had siblings in those year groups, you are not in the same position at all. And there was nothing more they could do after March. You're in completely the opposite position. Everything is still to play for, and actually you've now got the chance to fill in some of that evidence that might have been missing. And for children who might have had to self-isolate for some time last term, you've now got that time just to go back and try and pick up those bits of work that will help the teacher. But talk to your teacher, find out what will be the most useful, and make sure you are continuing to work hard, and you'll know the target grades that you're working to. You will know what you believe you're capable of. You've now got to make sure that the school has got as much evidence as possible that they can then collate and provide in order to have that grade calculated.
Yeah, and I imagine that this sort of situation will be really great for some pupils who will think, oh great, I've got the chance to really prove myself, and I hated exams anyway, so I'd rather prove myself this way. And then other kids, of course, like we're living in, just every adult and teen anyway, is kind of feeling the pressures of the pandemic and the fact that we're in a lockdown, we can't run around and see friends and go to parties, all the things that we do all the time normally. And sort of with that added, with the pressure of having to perform well at home, perhaps they've got siblings running around and the pandemic, how would you say that kind of teens can kind of manage that extra pressure?
And again, just look for the things that you can do. You don't have to do everything perfectly. You have to just show that you're working, and it doesn't to assemble a grade doesn't mean that every piece of work has to be at the same level. There will be some weeks when you just can't concentrate as well, and if you're in that situation with siblings, or things aren't going well, or your internet crashes, or your computer breaks, no one thing now determines that final grade. Everything counts. So actually it's making sure that you pace yourself, and not being too hard on yourself, but making sure you are communicating. If there is a problem, let your teachers know straight away, so that you haven't just disappeared for a week and they're worried about you and they don't know what's happened. Likewise for subjects that still have coursework, and I know there's fewer of those these days, but obviously the technologies, performing arts, students who are doing BTECs, the OCR Nationals, make sure you have got all of your coursework in one place, and talk to your teachers, because some of that might still be at school, some of it may be at home. And obviously this time we had no warning whatsoever that we were going into this lockdown after Christmas. So talk to people. There is time. Nothing needs to happen today. There's no pressure that it's got to be perfect today. We've got time, and we can work with students to sort the solution to any of these issues. But just be nice to yourself. It's not a final exam anymore, so actually we have got a little bit of space and time where we can organise and work around any of those issues that may crop up. And you're in exactly the same position as everybody else. Everybody's obviously having to find their way through this, but we do have time.
Yeah, and so I feel a really key one there is, whatever the kind of worry or uncertainty is, communicate with your school and communicate with your teachers. Yeah, I imagine with the sort of even still, sort of with the pressure, sort of a common reaction to extra pressure is kind of loss of confidence and loss of motivation. And I'm interested, Alicia, what you would say to a teen or to a parent of a teen who's just sort of feeling a bit kind of scared by all the pressure that's on them, and the fact that they're just sort of stuck at home as well.
Just coming back to that point about talk to the teachers, I'm really pleased to hear Kathryn say that, because I'm currently working with quite a few teenagers. Obviously, I've got Zoom calls at the moment only, who are struggling with anxiety issues. And when I say to the parent, what do the teachers say at school? They often say to me, oh no, we haven't told the teachers yet. I'm keeping it quiet. And I'm going, but why are we doing that? You know, better to get it out in the open, because most of the things that we worry about don't exist. And so, yeah, just as Kathryn says, I think to have that good open communication with the teacher will help. It can sometimes be hard for a parent to talk to a teenager, you know, especially if teenagers aren't necessarily in a receptive mood. You know, if you're feeling hacked off because you haven't seen your friends, we're all fed up of being cooped up at home. We're fed up of being with mum and dad all the time. There can be times when it doesn't really matter what mum and dad say, you know, you're just going to be wrong, because everybody, when they feel upset, they're trying to project their problem onto something. They're looking for something to blame. And the closest people to blame are going to be mum and dad. So it can be very difficult. You can tie yourself up in knots. But there are lots of things that you can do around the home environment that will really help to boost your teen's mental health. One of those things I talked at the beginning about holding, you know, a family weekly review meeting. There are also other things. If you imagine you're creating a family home timetable, definitely exercise. I think never has it been more important to allocate 1 hour each day for walking out in the fresh air, you know, even if it's just walking out in the local streets. And if it's not scheduled into a timetable, it's going to be very easy to skip doing it, especially if it's raining. You know, you can make it more interesting for your teens by maybe going out at night time. You know, I know at the moment the weather's absolutely foul, but, you know, could you stargaze maybe, or look for some nocturnal animals? You know, I even suggested to somebody the other day, could they have a barbecue in the garden? I know it's not barbecue weather, but we've got to get outside into the fresh air and do something different. And if it's really not possible to get out, then have, you know, sort of like a 30-minute kitchen dance and get your teens to choose their favorite music. Regular exercise is one of the most effective ways of changing the brain chemistry, and it's what doctors would now recommend if somebody came to see them with depression. The first line of treatment is get out and keep moving. So, you know, that's a very simple one to do. Also, when I talk about meal times, you know, now more than ever, it's going to be important to make a meal of a meal, because you've got nothing else to break up your day. So again, in your family weekly meeting, you could plan your meals. You know, could each child choose their favorite food? Could you have a theme night? Could you have a Chinese night, a Mexican night? You know, and when your teens are included in the decision-making process and are choosing their favorite food, they are more inclined then to start cooking. And cooking is actually, you know, has the added benefit of being a mindfulness activity. You know, when your mind is fully engaged, you can't be worrying about the future. We talk about mindfulness. Mindfulness is one of those things that we all talk about it nowadays, and I'm sure most people have discovered that it's not actually that easy to do. And there's nothing more frustrating than if you've had a really stressful day and someone says to you, hey, why don't you try a bit of mindfulness? That's really that phrase, I think, is the last thing to make anybody feel calmer and more relaxed. There's a reason why mindfulness practice is called practice. It's something that you have to do repeatedly, but there are some very clever techniques for doing mindfulness in action. And for example, you could take a walk outside and just have a running commentary of what you're seeing. I can see the blue sky, I can see the green leaves on the trees, I can see the dog running by the big black lorry. Anything that can occupy your mind, you've got to sort of think about it as a bit sort of like going to the gym for your mind. So these are lots of sort of quite straightforward activities. You can change the mood in the house. You can always sense when there's sort of anxiety. I always say that anxiety wafts around the house like an invisible gas. You know, no one can see it, but everybody knows it's there. So rather than sort of jumping on each other and saying, well, what's the matter? You know, yeah, there's nothing wrong. Yes, there is. I can feel it. Just think about those other ways of changing the mood in the house. Even if you just light, you know, aromatherapy candles, you can change the scents around the house. That's, again, another way of changing the brain chemistry. Having a laugh, you know, it's really important to have a laugh. Schedule once a week or twice a week, you know, family movie night, and it's got to be comedy night only. Have a good news only rule for meal times, for example, so that nobody, it's quite common when we get together around the table, everybody talks about their day, and then we often sort of talk about the problems. Oh, this broke down, oh, it's really frustrating, the internet connection, I can't do this. Just encourage everybody to seek out the positive. This is really training your mind to stay healthy, to stay positive, to keep going. Because let's face it, the latest news would suggest that we do have several more weeks, if not a couple more months, to be going with this. So it's all about putting good habits in place to keep our minds healthy.
Yeah, I really love all the different little tips that you put there, like the cooking, like sort of going for walks, finding ways of moving which isn't like it's like a PE class. But I'm interested in how you might personalize some of these different tips, or what you might do differently for a teen versus a child, and especially if you have kids of different ages, how can you manage their different needs at once?
Good question. It's hard for me to imagine a scenario like that. So you're thinking, what sort of age group children are you thinking of? Sort of like eight, nines?
If you have a 16-year-old who's working on their sort of like really important GCSE work, and you have sort of an 8-year-old who, you know, really needs to work on their times tables so they can get to the next part.
You know, I think it's going to be very important to create zones around the house. You know, look for every available space in the house. Even if you're on the upstairs landing and you open the airing cupboard door, you know, by doing so, have you all of a sudden found yourself a quiet corner where an 8-year-old could sit and read a book? Even, you know, partitioning rooms off, you know, hang a blanket up if needs be. And if you were to sort of label zones around the house, this is a quiet zone, this is a slightly more noisy zone, then everybody kind of knows what they're allowed to do in each space. It's also quite good, I think, to think about zones for different types of schoolwork. And if a child that sort of lies on their bed one day and then tries to work in front of the TV the next day, and then moves to the kitchen table the day after, it just it's harder to study and focus and work in that kind of environment. So I would, you know, if you have the same place, the same rules, the same zones every single time, okay, this is my quiet space, this is where I always do my maths work, for example, then each time you return to that place, you will find that you have anchored yourself to that spot and you will automatically be ready to learn. If we're talking about family squabbles, as inevitably, if you've got children across different age groups and spectrums, then again, that's another reason why I think the weekly family meeting comes into its own. So it's okay, I hear you, I understand what you're saying, let's write it down. I mean, if needs be, have a great big, you know, sheet of paper. Nobody goes to a meeting nowadays without an agenda. Fine, let's write it down and we'll discuss it on Saturday. And this can sort of put an end to the fights and the squabbles. I think it's also important for if you are in that situation, to have one-to-one time with your child, each child, so that no child feels left out. Now this time, I know parents are pushed at the moment, but the time might be, you know, let's put the bins out together. Let's sort out the laundry together. Let's fold the socks together. If it's just an ordinary everyday activity that you are doing with one of your children and and not all of them, then it has the added benefit not only that you've got a one-on-one activity, but it's not going to take you any extra time. If you approach it and think, okay, fine, I know I've got to have one-on-one time with each of my children, that's going to mean I've got to find time in the day to sit down and read a story or play a game with them. When am I ever going to do that? You're probably not. So things like the ordinary everyday tasks, laying the table, even one-on-one loading the dishwasher. It's just our turn tonight, and while we're doing it we can chat. It's about finding those spaces around the house that you can zone off and finding those precious minutes in the day where you can have that one-on-one time.
Yeah, and creating as much sort of variation and structure as you can within the same sort of day after day.
Yes.
I'm interested, Kathryn, in, because you must have experience and sort of oversight of a number of different families in your school. I wonder if you could advise, as well from the educational side, how can parents manage the needs, say if they've got sort of 2, 3, 4 children?
I completely agree with everything that's been said, and I think that making sure you've got time to talk to each individual and find out what they need. What I would also encourage families to think about is whether children can actually help and support each other, because actually for the older teenagers, those doing A-levels and GCSEs, the very best way of learning anything is for you to teach it. So if you do have a younger sibling, and fine, you'll have to overcome the arguments and things like that, but actually help your younger siblings with their maths or their English or their science, because you are going to learn so much from that. And particularly if you are just struggling with that motivation, explaining it to somebody else where you have to simplify it and think about why you're saying what you're saying. You're going through exactly the same process that your teacher does when they're planning your lessons, and you're going to gain as much from that as they are. And actually, if that means your younger sibling then will settle down and do a little bit of work so you can concentrate, you're actually getting that win-win situation. If it's a case of sharing devices in a household, I think trying to ensure that that's as fair and equitable as possible, and just acknowledging the demands that different children will have at different times. So if A-level and GCSE lessons are happening as live lessons, it is really important that they're in that live lesson, because you can't always access that lesson afterwards depending on the protocol of the school. So that learning time is gone. But equally for younger children, it may be really important that they're online at a certain point. So just being aware of everybody's timetables, and I know that you're a huge mediator for what's happening, but actually if everybody's got that structure and routine, it means everybody can focus on the work that they're doing. And I'll go back to my same point again. If device sharing is an issue, please just talk to the schools. Things have been a little bit slow, certainly in the past, but there are things that can be done. Could there be a data uplift to somebody's mobile phone so actually they can access some of the resources on their mobile phone if they don't need a laptop at that moment in time? But equally, for an extended written piece of work, it really does need to be a laptop. Even a tablet is not going to allow you to write an extended piece of work or an essay. So what resources do people need at that particular time? And then how can siblings work together and share that experience, because they can all help each other.
Yeah, that's lovely. And I guess emphasizing the benefits to the older child, to themselves, of explaining it to the younger child, that it's not just helping the younger one.
It's by far, all of the evidence shows that if you teach somebody something, you learn more from that activity. So teach them your GCSE notes, rehearse something that you've got to have ready, talk them through your coursework, because actually you're going to gain just as much from that activity and possibly even more.
Yeah, and I imagine as well, if kids want to talk to, and a piece of advice that we give at MyTutor is that a nice way to kind of avoid isolation at home is to kind of have study sessions with friends as well, where similarly they can teach one another. If one has a stronger subject than the other, then they can swap over. And it's
it's looking for ways that you can replicate that at home. So whether that's the group chats or a Zoom meeting where you put 3 or 4 friends together, because it is really important that they continue to have that peer interaction. And actually, it's often your friends who can give you the answer when you might not always want to put your hand up or ask the teacher, or it's just that silly little thing that you just want a little bit of reassurance around. So how can you ensure that that friendship and those discussions are still happening?
Yeah, and then Alicia, would you add anything to that on the note of sort of helping kids stop avoiding isolation and kind of creating a sort of educational ecosystem?
Yeah, I really like the idea of the older child helping the younger child. I completely agree with that. When I was running my Montessori school, that's exactly how we encourage the children to learn. And I know that quite a lot of parents who have been talking to me recently about their children suffering from anxiety, when we sort of start to unpick and unravel the problem and their reluctance to learn, sometimes the issue is more behavioural, as in the parent doesn't feel very confident in challenging the behaviour. And I think this is a good way of offering them choices. You know, if they're struggling with their own work, okay, fine. Well, if they really can't do their work and they're lacking the concentration, the motivation, they don't feel they're able to do it, fine. Could they help a younger sibling then? That's your next option, is if you don't have anything to do, go and help the younger one. With regards to staying connected, yes, I think it is a very good idea. And again, timetable sessions where, you know, encourage your children to, you know, have evening homework periods with their friends to talk about it. It is very difficult for them at the moment. So I think staying connected as much as possible. And it does go against everything I've been saying, of course, for the last couple of years, where parents have been asking me, how can I, you know, give my children a digital detox? And of course, we're doing the complete opposite now. We're saying, have more time on screens, phone your friends, stay in touch. That these are unusual times. And I think it's going to be a case of thinking about what's the value behind the screen time. And if it's good, that I think that sort of gives you the argument for not wasting those precious moments on the screen by just idly flipping through, you know, games that they don't need to.
Yeah, that is really
doing.
That it's just the idea of screen time, positive time, screen time, negative time. Screen time is just in a completely different context now, and we should worry about it much less than before. What we talk about a lot is the sort of active versus passive screen time, like screen time where you're talking to someone and learning and engaging, versus like something that's like, I mean, watching, not all shows are passive, but sort of having it where it's like where you're in touch with people as much as possible. It's just really positive at this time. So now in the sort of last about 15 minutes, we've got loads and loads of questions in from our parents. And I'm just going to bring Nicola in, who's been keeping her eye on them. And let me just pin you as well.
Okay, thank you. We've had some fabulous questions, both in chat and Q&A, and also some great tips in the chat as well. So thank you all so much for contributing. And Alicia and Kathryn, some fantastic advice there. Thank you so much. Lot of positive feedback on these family sessions. Alicia, a couple more questions around that. Do you recommend any particular days or times to do this? Should this be a weekend, over meal times? And how long should we allow for them?
I wouldn't do it over a meal time. Because you may find that people raise problems and disagreements in your family session, and I really like to keep anxiety away from meal times. Your meal times should be happy times where you just talk about positive things. When you have it, I think is a case of when you think would be right for your family, but it doesn't necessarily have to be sitting around a table. You don't have to call it a family meeting. You can call it a chat or a powwow or whatever it is that suits you. Some people I know prefer to sit on a rug in the middle of the sitting room. If it was summertime, you could have a blanket, you could take it to the park, you could all sit down, take a football with you, but sit down and have your meeting on a blanket. You know, when we're talking about teenagers and trying to find somewhere different for the talk, you could do it as you're walking around the streets. You could, if you were really stuck, sit in the car right now, you know, if you're trying to find somewhere else to do it. Or could you do it all upstairs sitting on a bed? wherever it is that you think it would go well. And in fact, if you find that one or two of your children don't say anything and they're very silent, and one or two of the others tend to dominate it, then I would change the seating plan, find somewhere different to hold the meetings. And I do have advice on how to encourage children to talk and how to learn to talk about their feelings too. But how long you have it, I think the younger the children, the shorter the meeting should be, and maybe you have it on a more frequent basis. I mean, with older children, maybe you could cut it down to once every couple of weeks. If you were having it twice a week, maybe they would sort of feel as if they're being picked on. Oh gosh, we've got to have a meeting. What have I done wrong today? So it's kind of getting away from that and just having a time when we could all chat. If you think about it, we've got home life, we've got school life, we've got work life, everything going on in the home at the moment. We don't go to work and not have meetings with our colleagues. And yet, you know, we expect families to operate in happy, you know, well-run ways without any kind of communication.
Thanks, Alicia. Great advice there. And I think we have a lot of attendees who are going to be testing this out over the next couple of weeks, and a great idea to think about how you can mix up that location. Could it be a walk? Could it be in the car? Kathryn, perhaps a question for you, in fact, for both of you. A lot of our attendees are finding that it's really hard to get their older kids to focus during school time. So they're on Zoom or on Google Classrooms, and they're also FaceTiming their friends on social media, completely distracted and not paying any attention. Any tips on how to encourage engagement?
I would strongly advise just that ongoing discussion about the work that you've got ahead of you for the day, and then what do you need to do for that lesson? How did you find that lesson? Because then if you find they're saying, well, I couldn't concentrate and I was just talking to my friends, it's then not getting into that full-blown argument about don't do that, but it's having that conversation about, well, look, actually, why don't we then timetable that meeting with your friends later on in the day, but just don't go on to that social media site while you're in the lesson. And it's trying to just look for those ways of making sure that work is containable. So you've got that lesson time, let's get the work done in the lesson, because actually then it's not hanging over you, you're not then having to worry about it. But I agree, it is really difficult, and I wholeheartedly agree. We've spent a lot of time trying to educate children to have gaps from screens, and now we're putting them on screens, and there are just too many temptations, and it's just trying to give that bit of discipline for the 20 minutes, half an hour, if that's what they need to start with, where actually it is just focus on your work, and then let's have some time talking to your friends at break time or lunchtime, and looking for those routines. Because for my school, we're on 6 lessons a day. That's a task, to ask a teenager to sit in front of a computer for 6 lessons a day, and to do that independently. For years, teachers have wanted children to have independent learning skills, and suddenly we've thrown children out back into their homes and said, right, now you learn independently. And it's really hard. And plenty of adults are finding this really difficult. So, and it's maybe acknowledging to your children that you're finding it hard, that you struggle to concentrate, but actually let's all have coffee at 10:30 and let's treat it as break time. Let's make sure we are all having lunch at 12 o'clock. And just having that conversation. How did the lessons go this morning? And then if they say, well, I ended up playing on a game, don't be too hard on that. Okay, that's not great for that lesson, but it's not the end of the world. It is the end of the world if it's every day, all day. So it's trying to get that balance. But the more you can keep a routine, keep talking to your friends, and if it is becoming a real problem, again, I'm repeating myself, but contact the school, speak to the form tutors, speak to the teachers, because they may have that hook just to bring your child back in. And it may be that they're just struggling and they don't understand it, and therefore chatting or playing games is a diversionary tactic so that they don't have to think about it.
And I think one thing you said that really valuable, Kathryn, is if they'll be open and share that. Because I think if they're acknowledging, I couldn't focus in that lesson, it's much easier to deal with. Alicia, anything you'd like to add?
I think at this point, something that perhaps is worth talking about is a lot of parents ask me, how can I tell if my child is just acting out or whether they are genuinely suffering from anxiety? So, you know, we sort of know that children are suffering from anxiety if we start having lots of angry outbursts, sibling fights, maybe tearful episodes, inability to concentrate or follow instructions, now, or have a craving for sweet foods and snacks. I could say that to most parents and they'll say, well, all my teenagers behave in that way. You know, my kids are always fighting and arguing and crying and they can't concentrate or follow instructions. So I guess what you're really looking for is an increase in the behavior, that this doesn't quite feel normal for you. Because if your children are struggling to concentrate, then yes, there is this temptation to think, okay, fine, you're being naughty, and to start thinking about chastising them, or should we perhaps take away their games and start penalizing them and telling them that they can't have any communication with their friends. But I would encourage parents to take a bit more time over it. Take a bit more time over it and see if we can get to the bottom of it. You know, we all start to procrastinate when we feel anxious. You know, how many of us enjoy filling out our tax returns, and rather than doing our tax return, you know, we'll go off and find a basket of ironing that all of a sudden needs doing, because that just takes us away from the task in hand. So is it that your child is being naughty or disobedient? I would try to sort of spend a bit more time with them and dig a bit deeper. Okay, fine. So you can't concentrate, you're tempted to go and play a game instead. What is it, you know, about the work that they can't do? And try to sort of get more to the bottom of it.
We've had quite a few questions from parents who've got much younger children, so years 2, 3 and 4. And one of the big questions is, how long should the school day be? Often when you're trying to juggle full-time jobs, you've got these small children that need a lot more support. It's like, well, we're doing a few hours in the morning. Does that work? Is that enough? Kathryn?
I would say you've got to find what works for you and your family. And I'm seeing things in the chat that are saying students in year 11, 12 and 13 are finding it really hard to do 5 lessons and then balance homework. And that is hard when you're in the same location. So for younger children, and for much younger children, I would say it's impossible. And you shouldn't be trying to do that 9 till 3 routine, and particularly not if you're having to work as well. So find what works for you. And again, I think Alicia said it right at the start. It's keeping up with those basics, the reading, a little bit of maths, Joe Wicks, whatever keeps that routine going, and that love and excitement for learning, because children do enjoy learning. But if it becomes a chore, and if it becomes that pressure, and parents are just feeling really frustrated because they can't help, children's concentration is just not that long, and not at that age. So I would say be nice to yourself and come up with a timetable that works for you. And again, speak to the school and explain those issues. And the school will be very clear about sort of how much time they think is a minimum time, and also what the maximum time is. And just as I see lots of children who aren't doing anything, I also see lots of children who are just doing too much. And if they are working all day, they shouldn't then be working all night as well. There's got to be this balance. And the danger at the moment is Saturday and Sundays don't feel any different to Monday to Friday. So it's trying to keep those routines and habits that you know you've got to the end of a week, that just make it feel more pleasurable and more exciting.
And Kathryn, that was actually another question, like, what is too much, and how do you stop your kids from doing too much?
How do you stop them is very difficult, but if they are trying to work right through the day and right through the evening, that's too much. And even when we're at school, that happens to children, particularly in those exam years, because they're trying to do everything. And obviously, speaking to your child and trying to have that conversation, do they agree that they're doing too much? Are they feeling under pressure with it? Are they struggling to balance the work? And then just trying to have that conversation. How long should the lesson have been? And has the teacher been clear about how long you should spend on homework? Because we all know we can expand work to fit the time available. And actually, it might be that they're just not working very efficiently. And the reason it took 2 hours to do that essay is because they were on the phones and talking to their friends. And actually it wasn't 2 hours work, it was 40 minutes work, but it spread over 2 hours. So it felt a real burden. So just trying to get to the bottom of how much are you actually working, and can we just work more efficiently within that? And again, I would strongly advise having that conversation with the teachers or the form tutors. Teachers aren't always going to get it right. And as I said, planning remote learning is really difficult. You haven't got that instantaneous feedback that actually this is taking a little bit longer than you thought it might. And for some children, they are just exceptionally conscientious. And if the teacher says it needs doing, they think it needs doing, or the world's going to end. And we need parents then to step in and say, actually, no, stop. And let's talk to the school. If the child's happy to do that on their own, fantastic. It may need the parent to phone up. It may need parents to phone up and say, my child doesn't know that I've contacted you, but I really just need to talk to you about this, because they shouldn't be working right through the day and right through the night and right through the weekend. That's too much.
We've only got a couple of minutes left. So what I did want to say is we'll try and respond to many of these questions that we haven't been able to get to in the follow-up emails as well. But as a last question, I think we'd love to hear from both of you. Do you recommend any particular resources, any communities, any books that can really help parents out in these tricky times? Alicia, I believe you have a rather fantastic book yourself.
Oh, yes. First Aid for Your Child's Mind. This came out just before Christmas, so just in time for the coronavirus. Actually, last Christmas, sorry, I'm talking about just in time for the coronavirus. And I do talk in there about, there's a chapter on there about a fear of germs, because I know that's quite a fear of germs, fear of going out, and school anxiety. I would also say that if parents are genuinely concerned about their child's anxiety, they can speak to their GPs. Their GPs can give them a referral to the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services, where they can speak to a psychologist. It does take a long time. There's often a waiting list, but it's well worth contacting the GP and getting that support and getting onto a waiting list. And then there's also, for teenagers, there's a great organisation called Shout. You can text, it's a text counselling service. So you can text the word shout to the number that's being put up. Are we putting it up on the screen, or are you giving a link to the website there?
I'm going to put the text as well.
So you text the word shout to 85258, and your teen will automatically be put in touch with a counsellor, and they will be chatting to them via text. So I think this is an ideal thing for teenagers who have got themselves stuck into this, no one listens to me, I've got no one to talk to, no one understands me. And this is something that they could even do in their bedrooms. They could just text and get access straight away to a counsellor, and a counsellor will chat to them via text for up to 45 minutes. They won't leave them until they are feeling a lot better.
And it feels less intrusive as well when it's through text.
And private as well, yes.
Just being asked, is it free?
Yes, it is. And it operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Fantastic. So in the last minute, would you each share one top tip you'd love all of our attendees to go away with? Kathryn.
Oh, there's so many. One, I might try and sneak two in, I'll be quick. There are so many free online resources that are going out at the moment. So Oak National Academy, Derbyshire Libraries have just made a lot of their resources freely available, and they'll create an e-library ticket. So there's so many fantastic things that are going out there. But that links into my other point, is ask the school. The school will be able to tell you those go-to websites, the go-to places. Lots of schools have got careers platforms that children can access, parents can access. But sometimes navigating all of that is just a little bit overwhelming. So just ask for advice, ask for those pointers. Where could you direct your child to? Because lots of people are working really hard to try and put out really high quality teaching and learning resources, fun learning activities, things to engage them, things to show children the careers that they can go into. And it is hard. We can't visit places face to face, but there is so much that we can actually access online. But just ask for that advice and get that direction.
Thank you. And Alicia, your top tip?
My top tip is, throughout all of this, I would just remember to stay well connected, have lots of fun and keep laughing and keep hugging and staying close, because for our mental health, that's going to be the most important thing. And that's what will help your child to get back into a learning routine when the schools finally do get back.
What a fantastic tip from both of you. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand over to Marietta just to close off.
Thank you so much, Nicola, from our Chief Medical Officer herself, from the Chief Marketing Officer.
Dr. Nicola, I'll be now.
Thank you so much, both of you, for the amazing advice. I've been really blown away by the amazing advice you've given this evening. And thank you so much to all of our audience who have contributed really, really great insights and questions all evening. So I really hope that it's been very practical and useful for everyone who's attended as well. And yeah, just so you know, we'll send out the recording of this evening, as well as some extra links to Alicia's book and to the resources that Kathryn's mentioned as well. So thank you so much again, and bye. Good evening.
Bye.